weeks ago, Cheryl told us the story of when Jesus' family came to get him, saying that he was crazy. When told, Jesus said, those who believed in him were his family. A couple of weeks ago, Corey told us of a woman caught in adultery. There were many who were pointing their finger at her, but Jesus pointed out their sin condition and told the woman to go and sin no more. Now we come to Mark 5:21 through 43. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Well, prior to this story in Mark's gospel, Jesus had sailed back across the Sea of Galilee and is back in the town of Capernaum. Back in the town where in Mark's gospel his first recorded miracle was casting out a demon from a man in the synagogue. Jairus was a synagogue leader. He might have been a lot like you and me. He attended church and participated in the business of church. Just as you and me, Jairus was a respectable member of the community who had a family, a house, and a life with responsibilities that we carry out to the best of our ability. Jairus may have witnessed the miracle in the synagogue. He would have at least heard the rumors of the power and authority Jesus demonstrated. His faith was taken to a new level when he became desperate. His daughter was dying, and she needed a miracle. So he pleaded, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." And Jesus went with him. The crowd followed also. They didn't want to miss the excitement. Jairus was different now. He wasn't just part of the crowd anymore. His need for and trust in Jesus had set him apart. He wasn't wondering anymore what to think of Jesus. He believed that Jesus was the only hope for his daughter, who he loved so very much. Then something quite amazing happened. We are introduced to a woman with a 12-year history of a bleeding disorder. She had been to doctors who in that day didn't have anything to make her better, and it seems they just made things worse. Mark tells us she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. This desperate, irrational, and bloody woman worked her way through the crowd, came up behind Jesus, and touched his cloak. She did it with the belief that if she could touch his clothes, she would be healed. It is natural for us to feel sorry for her, but she is someone we would rarely relate to. We are more like Jairus. Her desperate thoughts were right, however. Just touching Jesus' coat did heal her immediately. 12 years of suffering was over. But Jesus knew something. Power had gone out, and he says, "Who touched my coat?" The crowd has been bumping into him all along the way, so his disciples ask, "Are you serious?" This raises the question, what was different about her touching Jesus? Jesus kept looking for the person who had done it. The woman comes forward trembling with fear. Maybe she is afraid he will take it back. She tells him the whole truth of her story, and Jesus says to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." There it is. The difference was her faith. The story continues with the news that Jairus' daughter has died. The crowd is telling him there is no longer a need to bother the teacher. But Jesus interrupts and tells Jairus, "Don't fear, only believe." The picture has been painted. The woman who is the lowest of society, who wouldn't even have been allowed to enter Jairus' synagogue because of her condition, has just been healed and commended for her belief. And Jesus turns to Jairus and says, "There, pattern yourself after her. Don't fear, only believe." Jesus tells the crowd, the child is not dead, but asleep. And the crowd laughs at Jesus. The mourners have gathered already, and the wailing has started. It is a different culture than ours, but it would be like Jesus walking into a funeral home and saying to those gathered, "Cheer up. This child is not dead, but sleeps." We can imagine a reaction of, "Who is this jerk? Didn't anyone tell him? Get him out of here." But Jesus instead clears the house and takes Jairus and the girl's mother and his three, Peter, James, and John. He takes the girl's hand and says, "Talitha cum," little girl, wake up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around, and he tells them to get her something to eat. You see, just like Jairus, God has a daughter also. That unnamed woman, bloody and suffering, poor and helpless and irrational, she is the one Jesus calls daughter. We don't like looking there. She is the one that She is the one that Jesus points Jairus towards. He says, "Just believe like my daughter." Well, we don't like looking there. We don't like placing ourselves in her shoes, but that is what sin has done to us. Sin is a constant wound. Sin cripples our lives and our souls. Sin ruins families, careers, bank accounts, and church unity. Sin keeps us complacent in our comfort zone. Sin keeps us from loving those as Jesus does. Sin is not something we can beg our way out of. Sin is not something we can bargain with God over or ask a favor. We are dead in our sin. That sin only comes out when we throw ourselves at Jesus' feet, trembling and afraid of the moment, and tell the whole truth. It is at that moment that Jesus really raises the dead. When we put ourselves in this nameless woman's shoes, that is when Jesus says to us, daughter. That is when Jesus says to us, Talitha cum, little girl, wake up. Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healthy. And he orders his ministers to give the one he has raised something to eat. Here we find another example of Jesus telling us what it takes to be his family. He not only raised Jairus' daughter, he raises Jairus out of his dead religious life to the life that comes from truly believing in Jesus. Life as one of God's family. Where do you find yourself in this story? What in your life needs to be raised from the dead? What in your life is keeping you or others from the joy of Christ? Are there torn relationships? Someone you need to forgive or ask forgiveness from? Is there prejudice that leads you to judge others? Are there desires that you allow to lead you astray? Do you participate in gossip, either telling or listening? I'm taking this story at its word. I am praying for a touch of Jesus. I am praying that God will deliver me from my afflictions, believing that he can and will. And I am praying that you too will also pray to be delivered. Then we will be free to be nourished and to nourish all God's children in the faith. Amen.